He was the most brilliant admiral in Japan, and the one man who begged his country never to fight America. He had studied at Harvard, crossed the United States by train, and seen the factories that would one day bury him. Ordered to attack anyway, he planned Pearl Harbor with a warning. "I can run wild for 6 months, no more." At Midway, he built the greatest trap in naval history. But the enemy had already broken his secret code. In 5 minutes, the heart of his fleet, 4 aircraft carriers, was turned into burning wreckage. This is the story of the losing side. To understand how Japan's finest commander was destroyed, you have to start with the man who never wanted the war. Isoroku Yamamoto was a young officer at Tsushima, where a shell tore away 2 fingers of his left hand. The Navy sent him to America, where he studied at Harvard and served as an attaché in Washington. He traveled the United States and saw its oil fields, its steel mills, its endless automobile lines. He came home and told anyone who would listen a single truth. A war with America was suicide. For that, nationalists branded him a traitor, and assassins threatened his life until the Navy hid him at sea. But he had seen the future of war before almost anyone. The aircraft carrier, not the battleship, would rule. By 1941, Japan and America were sliding toward war over oil, embargo, and empire. Yamamoto argued against it to the very end, but the decision was taken far above his head. So the man who feared the war was ordered to find a way to win it. If war was certain, he reasoned, Japan's only hope was one sudden, annihilating blow. He gambled everything on a surprise strike to sink the American fleet as it slept in Pearl Harbor. On the 7th of December, his planes came, and the battleships burned, but the carriers were out at sea. For 6 months, everything happened exactly as he had promised. The Japanese Navy swept across the Pacific, unbeaten and seemingly unstoppable. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies all fell in a matter of weeks. But Yamamoto never forgot the one flaw in his great victory. The American carriers had escaped. Until those ships were destroyed, his triumph was only half finished, and he knew it. Behind the ocean, the sleeping giant was waking, its shipyards already laying down new fleets. Every month that passed, America grew stronger, and Japan grew relatively weaker. Time itself was his enemy, and he needed one decisive battle before the odds turned against him. Then American bombers struck Tokyo itself, and the raid shamed the Navy before the Emperor. Now Yamamoto was certain. He had to lure the American carriers out and destroy them at once. His target was a tiny coral atoll far out in the ocean, northwest of Hawaii, called Midway. The plan was vast and intricate, the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of naval war. He would attack Midway, force the American carriers out to defend it, and ambush them in the open sea. But the whole design rested on one fragile assumption, that the enemy would be taken by surprise. To split the American fleet, he sent a diversion far to the north, against the cold Aleutian Islands. Admiral Nagumo would lead the strike force of 4 great carriers out ahead of everyone. Yamamoto waited far behind aboard the mighty battleship Yamato, keeping radio silence to hide his hand. But the Americans had already broken the Japanese naval code and were quietly reading his signals. Admiral Nimitz knew almost every move before it came. The target, the date, the direction of attack. The man who had set the trap was walking straight into a trap of his own. The American carriers were already hiding northeast of Midway, while Yamamoto believed them far away. If the fall of a great commander moves you, take 1 second to subscribe and stand with the losing side. On the morning of the 4th of June, Nagumo launched his planes to bomb the island of Midway. American torpedo bombers attacked in waves, and almost every one of them was shot down in flames. Not a single torpedo struck home, and it seemed a hopeless, wasted sacrifice. But that sacrifice had dragged the defending fighters down low, and left the sky above wide open. On the carrier decks below, Nagumo hesitated, switching his bombs from one weapon to another. For a few fatal minutes, his decks were crowded with fuel, bombs, and armed aircraft. It was the most vulnerable moment a carrier can have, and it lasted just long enough. Out of the sun, American dive bombers fell almost unopposed onto the Japanese fleet. In barely 5 minutes, 3 great carriers were torn apart and set ablaze. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, their decks erupting as their own bombs exploded beneath them. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, fought on until evening, and then she too was burning in the dark. In a single morning, Japan lost 4 carriers and the finest naval airmen in the world. Aboard Yamamoto received the reports, and those near him said his face turned to stone. The trap he had built with such genius had closed upon his own fleet. He ordered the survivors to turn back, and the great offensive was over. In one morning at Midway, the tide of the entire Pacific War had turned. Japan would never again hold the advantage, and would spend the rest of the war retreating. The giant Yamamoto had warned about was now fully awake and furious. American shipyards poured out new carriers faster than Japan could ever hope to match. The fighting moved to a jungle island called Guadalcanal, a battle of pure attrition. There Japan bled away the pilots, ships, and planes that it could not replace. Every loss weakened Yamamoto further, while every American loss was made good within months. It was exactly the long war of factories he had always dreaded and foretold. The Admiral, who had seen it all coming, was now trapped inside the very disaster he predicted. By the spring of 1943, Yamamoto set out to tour the front and lift his men's morale. His staff sent the full itinerary by radio. Every airfield, every stop, every minute of his flight. But the Americans were still reading the Japanese code, word for word. They learned exactly where his plane would be, and exactly when it would be there. A squadron of long-range fighters was sent far out to lie in wait for him over the ocean. The same broken code that had doomed his fleet at Midway now hunted down the man himself. Over the jungle of Bougainville, the fighters found his aircraft and shot it down into the trees. The Admiral who had begged his nation not to fight America was dead, killed by the war he foresaw. For weeks, Japan hid the news, unable to admit that its greatest sailor was gone. When at last it was announced, the whole nation was plunged into shock and mourning. He was given a state funeral and honored as the hero of a war he had never wanted. The man who said Japan could not win was buried as the very symbol of its fight, and the code that killed him stayed secret, so his enemies could keep on reading Japan's mail. Yamamoto had been right about everything, and it had saved no one, least of all himself. He had warned that America could not be beaten, and been ordered to strike her anyway. He had planned the blow that woke the giant, and then watched the giant destroy his fleet. He had run wild for 6 months, exactly as long as he swore he could, and no longer. After Midway, The war became the slow, grinding defeat he had always predicted. Island by island, the Americans came on, and Japan was driven relentlessly back toward home. The factories he had seen with his own eyes buried the navy he had spent his life building. 2 years after his death, the fleet he loved lay rusting on the floor of the Pacific. The one admiral who truly understood America was the one his country would not hear. He obeyed, he planned, he fought, and he died for a war he knew could never be won. That, in the end, was the tragedy of Isoroku Yamamoto, a prophet no one wanted to believe. This has been the story of the losing side.